Millionaire disguised himself as a homeless man on Christmas Eve to give presents to homeless children. When a little homeless girl saw him, she shouted, "Daddy, I know it is you." The sun set over Beverly Hills, tinting the luxurious mansions of California's wealthiest neighborhood with golden hues. Marshall Angel Whitmore adjusted the rearview mirror of his latest imported car model as his 6-year-old daughter Esme hummed cheerfully in the back seat. The businessman smiled as he heard the child's voice singing a Christmas song, his eyes meeting hers through the mirror's reflection. The angelic face of the girl, framed by dark curls, was illuminated with the expectation of the Christmas party that would take place at her school that night. Her little fingers played with the hem of her new red dress, specially chosen for the occasion. "Daddy, do you think Mrs. Guadalupe will like my performance?" Esme asked, her brown eyes shining with anxiety. Marshall adjusted his navy blue tie, thinking about how his daughter had tirelessly rehearsed for the role of an angel in the Christmas play. "My princess, she will love it." "You're the brightest star in the whole school," he replied, feeling his chest swell with pride. Esme's smile lit up the entire car interior, painfully reminding him of his late wife, Carmen, who had passed away during childbirth. Traffic was heavy during that Christmas month, the streets of Beverly Hills congested with luxury cars and hurried people carrying bags of presents. Marshall checked his wristwatch, a rare platinum brand that had cost a small fortune, noting that they still had enough time to make it to the performance. His new wife, Delilah, had decided not to accompany them, claiming a severe headache. He sighed, realizing it was yet another of her countless excuses not to attend Esme's school events. The traffic light turned green, and Marshall gently accelerated as Esme continued her Christmas caroling. Suddenly, an out-of-control truck appeared at the intersection, running the red light at high speed. Time seemed to slow down as Marshall processed the scene. The growing headlights of the truck, Esme's frightened scream, the tires screech against the asphalt as he tried to swerve abruptly. "Daddy!" His daughter's desperate cry was the last thing he registered before the devastating impact. The deafening sound of the collision echoed down the avenue, metal twisting against metal in a macabre symphony. Marshall's vehicle spun violently, rolling over 3 times before dragging across the road in a display of sparks and shattered glass. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the noise of the accident. Marshall, trapped amid the wreckage, struggled to remain conscious. His entire body ached, but his only concern was Esme. "My princess, Esme," he called out in a hoarse voice, trying to turn and see the now unrecognizable back seat. A crowd began to form around the accident site, alarmed voices speaking rapidly, cell phones recording the scene, while someone shouted for an ambulance. The smell of gasoline and burnt rubber permeated the air, mingling with the metallic scent of blood. Marshall fought against the darkness that threatened to envelop him, his trembling hands attempting to release the seatbelt. "Please, my daughter. Someone, help my daughter," he pleaded, his voice choked with desperation and pain. The sound of approaching sirens sliced through the Mexican night air, red and blue lights dancing across the facades of the luxurious buildings. Paramedics ran towards the wrecked vehicles, their professional voices coordinating the first aid efforts. Marshall heard fragments of their conversations as if submerged. Multiple fractures, possible internal bleeding. "The girl is... We need another ambulance." "Mr. Whitmore." A female voice caught his attention as gentle yet firm hands began assessing his injuries. "Can you hear me? We're here to help. Please try not to move." Marshall wanted to scream, wanted to demand they save his daughter first, but his voice seemed stuck in his throat. Tears mingled with the blood trickling from a cut on his forehead as he struggled to keep his eyes open. The world around him began to blur, the voices growing distant, as if he were being pulled into a tunnel. His last conscious sight was of a small red ballet slipper, lost on the asphalt amidst the debris, glowing under the siren lights like a cruel reminder of the performance that would never happen. "My princess, forgive me," were his final words, before the darkness finally enveloped him completely. Chaos ensued on the prestigious Beverly Hills Avenue as rescue teams frantically worked amid the wreckage. The truck driver, visibly intoxicated, was being restrained by police officers, while incoherently shouting about brake failure. The light rain that had started to fall seemed to cry for the unfolding tragedy, turning the asphalt into a black mirror, reflecting the emergency lights. Minutes later, Delilah arrived at the hospital in her red sports car, her high heels echoing through the parking lot as she ran towards the emergency room. Her made-up face displayed a concern that, to those unfamiliar with her, seemed genuine. "I'm Marshall Whitmore's wife," she announced at the reception desk, her voice trembling slightly. The staff, recognizing the name of Beverly Hills' most influential family, immediately ushered her inside. In the emergency room, doctors worked intensely to stabilize Marshall. His vital signs fluctuated as disjointed murmurs escaped his bruised lips. "Esme, my princess, the Christmas performance." Delilah remained by his side, holding his hand, her eyes attentive to every procedure, every piece of equipment, every movement of the doctors. At times her gaze would drift to the hallway, where the medical team rushed with equipment and blood bags. In the other wing of the emergency room, Esme's situation was even more delicate. Her small body, still dressed in the now-stained performance outfit, was bravely struggling. "Blood pressure dropping," alerted a young nurse, her nimble hands adjusting medications and monitors. The red Christmas dress that should have shone under the school stage lights lay torn and stained, a sad testament to what that night should have been. Delilah alternated her time between the room where Marshall was and the hallway leading to the wing where they were treating Esme. With every movement of the doctors, her face showed anxiety. "Doctor, please, they're going to be okay, won't they?" she repeatedly asked, her voice laden with studied emotion. Between one visit and another, she discreetly checked messages on her cell phone, typing quick replies to her mother. The journey to Angeles Hospital in Beverly Hills, the most prestigious in the region, had been marked by moments of extreme tension. In the ambulance transporting Esme, the paramedics worked tirelessly to keep her vital signs stable. The small crucifix she wore around her neck, a gift from her late mother, swayed gently with the movement of the vehicle, reflecting the flashing lights like a beacon of hope in the darkness. At the hospital reception, a team of doctors was already waiting, alerted about the arrival of the very important patients. Dr. Martinez, the chief surgeon, was quickly organizing two distinct teams, one for Marshall and one for Esme. Delilah closely followed every movement, every procedure, every medical decision. Her eyes recorded every detail, while her mind worked on possibilities no one could suspect. In a moment of apparent distraction, Delilah approached the room where the patient's belongings were kept. With trembling fingers, she rummaged through the plastic bag with Esme's clothes. Her eyes sparkled when she found a small gold necklace with a pendant, a family heirloom that Marshall had given his daughter, an inheritance from his late wife. For a moment, she held the jewel between her fingers before carefully storing it in her designer purse. Marshall began to partially regain consciousness during the examinations. His first words were an anguished call. "Esme, where's my daughter?" The nurse tried to calm him down, but he became increasingly agitated. "I need to see my daughter. The Christmas pageant. She was going to be an angel." Delilah quickly approached, caressing his hair. "Calm down, love, she's being well taken care of," she whispered, her melodious voice trying to convey tranquility. In the operating room, a shrill and continuous sound cut through the air. Esme's heart monitor showed a flat line. "Cardiac arrest," shouted a nurse. The medical team immediately began resuscitation maneuvers. Delilah, overhearing the commotion from the hallway, felt a chill run down her spine. Her phone vibrated with a new message from her mother, but for the first time that night she hesitated to reply. Her eyes fixed on the door of the operating room, where a little girl's fate hung by a thread. In the hospital corridor, time seemed to drag as the medical teams worked tirelessly. The sounds of the machines mingled with the hurried footsteps of the professionals, creating an anguished symphony. Delilah remained seated in the waiting room, her perfectly manicured hands nervously clutching the designer bag where she had stowed Esme's necklace. From time to time, her gaze turned to the hallway leading to the operating room. "Mrs. Whitmore," a young nurse approached with a cup of water. "You need to try to calm down, you're very pale." Delilah accepted the cup with trembling hands, taking small sips while observing the movement of the hospital. Whenever the double doors of the surgical wing opened, her body visibly tensed. Behind her concerned expression, her mind calculated every possible scenario, every possible outcome of that night. In the CT scan room, Marshall continued murmuring his daughter's name between moments of consciousness and unconsciousness. The doctors worked quickly to assess the extent of his injuries, concerned about possible internal injuries. "Esme, my princess, forgive me." His words were a constant lament that broke the medical team's hearts. Delilah, overhearing her husband's murmurs, bit her lower lip, a habit that surfaced whenever she was truly nervous. The chief surgeon emerged from the operating room, his face tense under the surgical mask. Delilah jumped to her feet, her heart racing. "Doctor, how's Esme?" Her voice trembled, and for the first time that night, it wasn't an act. The doctor took a deep breath before responding, carefully choosing his words. "We managed to reverse the cardiac arrest, but the next few hours will be crucial. She lost a lot of blood and—" Before he could finish, a commotion began in the hallway. A nurse was running towards the CT scan room, shouting for help. "Mr. Whitmore is seizing." The doctor immediately turned, running towards the emergency room. Delilah froze for a moment, her face losing all color. Her phone vibrated once more in her purse, but she couldn't find the strength to answer it. In the recovery room, Esme was finally stable, although her condition was still extremely critical. Her small face, bruised from the accident, was partially covered by tubes and machines. An older nurse was lovingly arranging her dark hair on the pillow, murmuring an ancient prayer in Portuguese. The crucifix she wore around her neck had been stored with her other belongings, except for the chain that now rested in her stepmother's purse. Delilah paced back and forth in the hallway, torn between the two wings where her husband and stepdaughter were fighting for their lives. Her phone kept insistently vibrating, but she silenced it, shoving it deep into her purse. The hours dragged on like an eternity. Doctors came and went, bringing updates on the two patients' conditions. Marshall had been stabilized after the seizure, but remained in critical condition. Esme was breathing with the help of machines, her little body fighting to recover from the trauma of the accident. Delilah remained there, a solitary figure in the hospital hallway, her face a mask of concern that was slowly becoming genuine. In the early hours of the morning, when the bustle of the hospital had died down and the silence became almost oppressive, Delilah finally opened her purse and took out her phone. There were dozens of unread messages from her mother, each one more urgent than the last. With shaking fingers, she typed a single message. "We need to wait. Everything has changed." Her gaze turned to the hospital window, where the lights of California shone bright under the dark night. In the recovery room, Esme's heart monitor made a different sound, and a new commotion began in the hallway. Delilah closed her eyes, a solitary tear rolling down her perfectly made-up face, as the sound of yet another ambulance siren echoed in the distance, bringing with it the weight of decisions that now seemed too heavy to bear. 3 weeks had passed since the night of the accident. Beverly Hills' Angeles Hospital maintained its quiet routine, broken only by the soft whirring of the machines monitoring Marshall Whitmore in his private VIP room. Doctors came and went at regular intervals, checking his vital signs, which, though stable, showed no signs that he would soon awaken from his coma. Delilah remained by his side, the picture of a devoted wife, while her mind worked through every detail of what was to come. Next door, Esme played absent-mindedly with a new doll, a gift from one of the nurses. Her injuries were already starting to heal, and color was slowly returning to her face. The red dress from the Christmas pageant had been replaced by a pink hospital pajama set, but her eyes still carried a profound sadness every time she asked about her father. "Auntie," she would call Delilah in her childlike voice, "when is Daddy going to wake up?" Delilah forced a sweet smile, stroking the girl's dark hair. "Soon, darling. He just needs a little more rest." The medical team was impressed by Esme's rapid recovery. Her young body had responded extraordinarily well to the treatments, and the tests showed there would be no permanent effects from the accident. Dr. Martinez made his morning rounds, checking the latest results. "She's ready for discharge," he commented to Delilah, who immediately displayed a joy that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Wonderful news, Doctor. I can't wait to take her home." Delilah methodically organized Esme's discharge paperwork, each document carefully reviewed and signed. As Marshall's wife and Esme's legal stepmother, she had full authority to assume custody of the girl while her husband remained in a coma. Nurses helped pack up Esme's belongings, bundling up the drawings she had made during her stay. most depicting her and her father in happier times. One of the older nurses couldn't help but feel a pang seeing the little girl tenderly put away each drawing. Marshall's room was silent, save for the rhythmic beeping of the monitors. Delilah sat by his bedside, holding her husband's still hand as she studied his motionless face. "Don't worry, darling," she whispered, making sure she was alone. "I'll take very good care of our little one." Her fingers idly stroked his wedding band as her phone vibrated again with messages from her mother, now more urgent and frequent. The hospital's social worker made her final routine visit, verifying that everything was in order for Esme's discharge. Delilah presented all the necessary documents: her marriage certificate to Marshall, Esme's paperwork, proof of residence at the Beverly Hills mansion. Everything perfectly organized, leaving no room for questions. "Are you sure you'll be able to take care of the little girl and your husband at the same time?" the social worker asked, concerned. Delilah smiled, her melodious voice oozing false sincerity. "Of course. Family is everything to me." Esme sat on the edge of the bed, her little legs dangling in the air as a nurse braided her hair. The girl clutched tightly to a teddy bear her father had given her on her last birthday, her eyes fixed on the door to the room where he lay. "Can we say goodbye to Daddy before we go?" she asked innocently. Delilah hesitated for a moment but agreed, knowing she needed to keep up appearances. "Of course, my love. Let's say see you soon to him." The corridor between the two rooms never seemed so long for Esme. Her small steps were hesitant, as if each meter drew her further away from her father. Delilah guided her with a hand on her shoulder, her fingers gripping lightly on the fabric of the new coat she had brought for her release from the hospital. In her other hand, she held her designer handbag, where her phone kept insistently vibrating with unread messages. The last visit to Marshall's room was brief and silent. Esme approached the bed, her little hands gently touching her father's face. "Goodbye, Daddy," she whispered, a lone tear running down her cheek. "Promise you'll wake up soon?" Delilah watched the scene with a mixture of impatience and anxiety, her eyes constantly turning to the clock on the wall. Time was passing, and there was much to be done. At the hospital reception, the medical staff bid farewell to Esme, some with tears in their eyes after weeks of caring for the little patient. Delilah arranged the final details with the administration, signing the last batch of documents. Her driver was already waiting outside with the car, Esme's suitcases carefully arranged in the trunk. The girl took one last look back, towards the floor where her father remained in a coma, unaware that this moment would mark the beginning of a journey that would change her life forever. The car left the hospital parking lot, and as soon as they turned the first corner, Delilah's demeanor changed completely. The sweet smile she had maintained at the hospital disappeared, giving way to an expression of barely contained irritation. When Esme timidly asked where they were going, Delilah rolled her eyes. "Shut up, annoying child," she replied curtly, surprising the girl with the abrupt change in treatment. "You insufferable brat," Delilah roared, her face twisted in anger. "If I hear one more peep, you'll bitterly regret it." Esme shrank into the back seat, hugging her teddy bear tighter. Tears began to flow silently down her face as she watched the familiar streets of Beverly Hills fade into the distance. The driver, a man with a serious expression, kept his eyes fixed on the road, pretending not to notice the change in atmosphere in the vehicle. When the girl sniffed softly, Delilah turned abruptly. "Swallow that crying now, you filthy little brat." Delilah grabbed Esme's arm forcefully, her eyes blazing with hatred. "If I hear one more sob, I'll throw that ridiculous bear out the window and you'll never see it again, understood?" The journey continued along increasingly unfamiliar streets, the landscape gradually changing. Delilah typed furiously on her phone, occasionally casting impatient glances at Esme through the rearview mirror. When the girl tried to ask about her father again, Delilah banged forcefully on the seat. "I told you to be quiet. Your father is in a coma and won't wake up anytime soon. Now you're under my responsibility, and things are going to be very different." The afternoon sun was beginning to set as they reached a more secluded area of the city. Esme noticed the houses were larger and farther apart, with high walls and extensive gardens. Her stomach growled with hunger. They hadn't stopped for lunch. "Are you hungry?" asked Delilah with false sweetness, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "You're starving, little princess." Delilah laughed cruelly, her eyes shining with satisfaction. "Well, you better get used to it. In my house, A spoiled little rat like you is going to learn the hard way that life isn't the bed of roses your daddy gave you." The change in Delilah's behavior was frightening. The mask of the caring stepmother had fallen completely, revealing a cold and impatient woman. When Esme dropped her teddy bear on the car floor, Delilah grabbed it violently. "What a ridiculous thing!" she exclaimed, carelessly throwing the toy back. "It's high time you stopped with these childish antics." The car made a tight turn, entering a private street lined with ancient trees. Esme could see an imposing mansion at the end of the path, its grey walls looking even darker in the twilight. Delilah put her phone away in her purse, adjusting her hair and makeup. "Now listen closely," she said, her tone as sharp as ice. "When we arrive, you will behave. No crying, no questions about your father, no tantrums." The driver parked in front of the mansion, and Delilah grabbed Esme's arm tightly before they got out of the car. "If you make a peep about how the trip here was, you'll bitterly regret it." The veiled threat in her voice made the girl tremble. "And remember, I'm your legal guardian now. No one will believe a little girl over the word of a respectable adult. And if you open your mouth, I'll make sure your daddy never wakes up." An older woman waited at the mansion's door, an artificial smile identical to the one Delilah used to wear at the hospital plastered on her face. Esme watched in terror as her stepmother instantly reassumed her mask of docility when leaving the car. "Mother!" Delilah exclaimed, embracing the older woman. "I've brought our little guest." The look they exchanged sent a chill of fear down Esme's spine. The night at Agnes's mansion was long and frightening for Esme. The vast, cold room, so different from her cozy bedroom at her father's house, seemed to swallow her in its vastness. The old bed, with its hard mattress and coarse sheets, offered no comfort. Without her teddy bear to hug, the girl spent hours curled up, watching the shadows dance on the walls until finally falling asleep from exhaustion. The awakening was brutal. Agnes flung the door open with a bang at 6 in the morning, throwing open the heavy curtains. "Time to get up. I won't accept laziness in this house." Still groggy and disoriented, Esme barely had time to sit up before Agnes snatched her covers away. "Put this on," she ordered, tossing a plain, unflattering dress onto the bed. "And wash that face. I don't want to see any more tears." Breakfast was served in the kitchen, not the elegant dining room from the night before. A bowl of unsweetened porridge and a glass of warm milk awaited Esme. Agnes watched with hawk-like eyes as the girl tried to swallow the flavorless food. "Eat it all," she ordered when Esme pushed the half-empty bowl away. "I won't tolerate waste. Your father may have spoiled you, but things are different here." Delilah had already left early for the hospital, maintaining her facade of devoted wife. Agnes led Esme to a small room in the back of the house, adjacent to the kitchen. "This is where you'll spend your mornings," she declared, pointing to a pile of clothes to iron. "Every little princess needs to learn the value of work." The room was stuffy, with only a narrow, high window, and smelled of mold and cleaning products. The hours dragged on as Agnes forced Esme to fold towels and napkins. Her small hands, accustomed only to holding crayons and toys, soon became red and sore. When the girl dropped a pile of napkins, Agnes scolded her harshly. "Clumsy? Is this how you repay our kindness in taking you in?" The words were as sharp as knives, making Esme shrink further. Lunch was no better than breakfast, a bowl of thin soup and hard bread. Agnes ate in silence at the head of the table, occasionally casting critical glances at Esme. "After lunch," she announced with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "you'll learn how to clean the bathrooms. A young lady needs to keep occupied, doesn't she?" The afternoon dragged on in a succession of humiliating household chores. Esme's small hands trembled as she tried to handle cleaning products too heavy for her age. Agnes supervised every move, criticizing and pointing out flaws constantly. "More elbow grease on that brush, and I don't want to hear any complaining. Spoiled children need to learn their place." When night finally fell, Esme could barely stand from exhaustion. Dinner was a repeat of breakfast, flavorless food and sharp orders. Agnes led her back to the cold room, locking the door behind Esme. "Tomorrow we start all over again," she said through the closed door, her heels echoing down the hallway as she walked away. Alone again, Esme curled up on the hard bed, her hands still stinging from the day's labor. In the oppressive silence of the room, she thought of her father, the hospital, and her previous life that felt more and more distant. The tears she had held back all day finally flowed freely down her face as she whispered into the darkness, "Daddy, please wake up soon." The mansion fell silent, save for the occasional sound of Agnes's heels downstairs and the merciless ticking of the clock, marking the start of a new life Esme could never have imagined. After 2 months in a coma, Marshall Whitmore's fingers twitched slightly on the crisp white hospital sheets. Delilah, who was distracted by her phone, didn't notice the initial movement. It was only when he emitted a hoarse, guttural sound that she jumped from her chair, quickly pocketing the phone and assuming her devoted wife facade. Marshall's eyes opened slowly, disoriented, trying to focus on his surroundings. "Esme," was the first word that escaped his parched lips, his voice almost unrecognizable after so long without use. Delilah immediately pressed the button to call the nurse while holding her husband's hand with false tenderness. Marshall tried to move, but his body, weakened by the long period of inactivity, barely responded to his commands. The confusion in his gaze was evident as he finally managed to focus on Delilah's face. Where is my daughter?" The medical team invaded the room, performing a series of exams and checks. Delilah was forced to step back, but she kept a studied smile on her lips, carefully observing every move of the professionals. Marshall continued calling out for Esme, his voice growing stronger and more desperate with each passing minute. The doctor tried to calm him down, explaining that he needed to remain calm in order not to compromise his recovery. "Please," he pleaded, "I need to see my daughter. Where is she?" Delilah took advantage of the moment when the doctors were checking Marshall's vital signs to approach him again, her perfectly manicured hands tenderly adjusting his hair with calculated affection. "Love, you need to calm down," she whispered in his ear. "So much time has passed. We have so much to discuss. But first, you need to regain your strength." Her words, though sweet, carried a sinister weight that Marshall, in his debilitated state, could not perceive. The following days were a torture for Marshall. Every time he woke up, his first question was about Esme, and each time Delilah diverted the subject with cruel skill. "The doctor said you can't have strong emotions now," she repeated, her honeyed voice hiding a perverse satisfaction at seeing the growing anguish on her husband's face. The nights were punctuated by nightmares where he relived the accident, waking up drenched in sweat, calling out for his little princess. A week passed, and Marshall's physical recovery progressed rapidly, fueled by his determination to become strong enough to find out what had happened to his daughter. Delilah remained by his side constantly, controlling who entered the room, filtering information, keeping him isolated from the outside world. When he insisted on knowing about Esme, she assumed a grave expression. "Marshall, you need to be stronger to talk about that. Please, trust me." The physiotherapy exercises were exhausting, but Marshall pushed himself beyond the limit, determined to regain his strength. Delilah observed his sessions with an almost scientific interest, mentally calculating how much longer she would need to keep him in that state of uncertainty. During a particularly difficult session, when he almost fell while trying to take his first steps, she approached with false concern. "Don't push yourself so hard, love. We have all the time in the world." On the eve of his hospital discharge, Marshall was sitting in the room's armchair, observing the city through the window. His thoughts were fixed on the last time he had seen Esme, dressed in red, excited about her Christmas performance. Delilah entered the room carrying some documents, her expression more somber than usual. "Marshall," she began, her voice studiedly choked, "tomorrow you'll be discharged and we need to talk about something very serious." The tension in the room was palpable. Marshall turned to face his wife, his eyes reflecting a deep fear of what was to come. Delilah slowly approached, holding a folder with documents against her chest. "There's something you need to know about Esme," she said, her voice low and controlled. Marshall's heart monitor began beeping faster, reflecting his growing anxiety. "What happened to my daughter, Delilah? For God's sake, tell me." The morning of the hospital discharge dawned grey in Beverly Hills. Delilah insisted on taking Marshall for a walk before going home, claiming he needed fresh air after being confined for so long. The driver dropped them off at a peaceful park, where some children played in the distance. Marshall observed every girl who passed by, his heart tightening as he instinctively searched for his little Esme's face in each one of them. Delilah guided him to a secluded bench, her hands firmly holding the folder of documents she had carried from the hospital. The cold wind ruffled the leaves of the trees, creating a melancholic melody that seemed to foreshadow what was to come. "Marshall," she began, her voice studiedly choked, "do you remember the accident?" He nodded, a lump forming in his throat. The memories of that Christmas night were still fragmented, flashes of lights, sirens, and Esme's red dress. "At the hospital," Delilah continued, slowly opening the folder, "the doctors did everything they could." Her voice failed theatrically, and she took a handkerchief from her purse, dabbing at non-existent tears. Marshall felt his world begin to crumble, his hands trembling as he tried to reach for the documents she held. Delilah pulled out a carefully forged death certificate and handed it to her husband. "Esme. She didn't make it through the injuries. Our little princess, she's gone, Marshall." The scream that escaped Marshall's throat was something primal, a mixture of pain and denial that made the distant children stop playing. His hands crumpled the document as he shook his head frantically. No, you're lying. My daughter can't. She can't." Delilah embraced him, hiding her face so he wouldn't see the gleam of satisfaction in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, my love. I tried to prepare you, tried to wait for the right moment." "Where is she?" Marshall asked between sobs, his voice broken by pain. Delilah was already prepared for this question. "Come with me," she said softly, helping him up from the bench. The driver was waiting for them, and within minutes they were on their way to the city's most exclusive cemetery. Throughout the journey, Marshall held the death certificate against his chest, as if that piece of paper was the last connection to his daughter. The cemetery was an elegant place, with imposing mausoleums and well-tended gardens. Delilah guided Marshall among the gravestones until they stopped before a particularly new one. Esme's name was engraved on the cold marble, along with the dates that marked her short life. Marshall fell to his knees before the fake headstone, his tears wetting the freshly cut grass. Delilah remained standing behind him, a hand on his shoulder, perfectly playing the role of consoling widow. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked through sobs. Delilah knelt beside him, her voice measured and rehearsed. "The doctors said you wouldn't be able to handle the news right after waking from the coma. Your heart was too weak." She paused dramatically, pulling more documents from the folder. "Here are all the medical reports, the death certificate, the funeral papers. I took care of everything while you were unconscious." Marshall could barely read the papers through his tears, but each document seemed to confirm his worst nightmare. Delilah had meticulously planned everything. Each forged paper told the story of a tragedy that never happened. "My little princess," he murmured, running his fingers over the engraved letters on the headstone. "Forgive me for not protecting you." Delilah watched the scene with a perfectly studied expression of sadness, while inwardly savoring every moment of her husband's anguish. The cold wind of the cemetery ruffled the artificial flowers that Delilah had strategically placed on the fake grave. Marshall remained there, shattered, reliving every precious moment he had shared with his daughter. Delilah discreetly checked her watch. There was one final act to her cruel performance. "Honey," she said softly, "there's something Esme left for you, something she made at the hospital before." Her voice failed purposefully as she searched for one more item in her folder of documents. With trembling fingers, Delilah took a crumpled drawing from the folder. It was one of Esme's last school assignments, a colored drawing of her and her father smiling under a bright sun. Marshall took the paper as if it were the most precious thing in the world, his tears falling on the already faded colors. "She made this for you," Delilah lied, her voice laden with false emotion. "She said it was so you wouldn't be sad when you woke up." The return to the Whitmore mansion was marked by a suffocating silence. Marshall kept the drawing close to his chest, his gaze lost through the car window. The city looked different now, darker, emptier, a world without his little princess's laughter. Delilah held his hand, perfectly playing the role of consoling wife, while inwardly savoring how her husband was completely shattered by the lie she had constructed. As they entered the house, Marshall stopped in the middle of the living room, looking around as if he were in a strange place. Everything there screamed Esme's absence, her toys still scattered, waiting for an owner that Delilah knew wouldn't be coming back anytime soon. "I didn't have the heart to change anything," she said, her voice studiedly choked. "I thought you'd like to decide what to do with her things. Marshall stumbled to the nearest armchair, collapsing into it as if his legs could no longer bear the weight of his grief. The days that followed were a blur of suffering for Marshall. He wandered through the house like a ghost, often stopping in Esme's room, touching her belongings with trembling hands. Delilah kept her performance flawless, always nearby, always consoling, while secretly savoring every moment of her husband's agony. At night, Marshall's screams echoed through the mansion, nightmares where he relived the accident, now mixed with the false images Delilah had planted in his mind about his daughter's death. One morning, Marshall found the red dress that Esme would wear at the Christmas recital, still hanging in the closet. His legs faltered, and he fell to his knees, clutching the fabric to his face. Delilah found him like this, and quickly knelt by his side, her comforting hands on his shoulders. Maybe it's better to donate her things, she suggested with feigned delicacy. Other children could. She didn't finish the sentence, interrupted by Marshall's devastating sob. The office, once his refuge of power and control, now seemed like a prison to Marshall. Piles of important documents accumulated untouched. Nothing else seemed to matter anymore. Delilah took care of everything, assuming more and more control over her husband's business and personal life as he sank deeper into his depression. "You need to rest," she insisted with false concern. "I'll take care of everything." At night, alone in the library, Marshall held the necklace he had given Esme, the only piece that Delilah allowed him to keep. His hands trembled as he touched the small pendant, remembering his daughter's smile when she received it as a gift. Outside the room, Delilah watched through the crack in the door, an almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips as she typed a message on her cell phone. "For now, everything is going as planned, Mum." He believed it all. The days turned into weeks, and Marshall remained immersed in his grief, becoming more and more dependent on Delilah for everything. She managed his medication, controlled his visits, filtered his calls, all under the pretext of protecting him in his moment of fragility. In his pain, he didn't realize how he was being manipulated, how every decision of his now went through Delilah's scrutiny, who wove her web ever tighter around him. In the silent mansion, Esme's laughter was only memories echoing in Marshall's nightmares. Meanwhile, somewhere not too far away, a little girl cried alone in a dark room, calling for a father who believed he had lost her forever. Delilah's plan was not going as expected, but she had not only broken Marshall's body in the accident, but now also his spirit, leaving him vulnerable and completely under her control. The sun had already set when Delilah arrived at the isolated mansion where her mother kept Esme. The girl was locked in her upstairs room, but she could hear the sound of her stepmother's heels echoing through the marble hallway. Agnes greeted her daughter in the living room, where a bottle of red wine was already open on the coffee table. The two women settled into the luxurious sofas, their tense expressions revealing that the conversation would be serious. "The original plan is completely ruined," Delilah began, pouring herself a generous glass. "Marshall believed her death, fell like a sitting duck for our story. Now we can't just show up asking for a ransom for a girl he thinks is dead." Agnes drummed her red nails on the arm of the sofa, her face contorted in an expression of displeasure. Esme, who had discovered she could hear the conversation from the living room through an old ventilation pipe, held her breath so as not to miss a single word. Agnes got up, walking to the window overlooking the dark garden. "All our planning, all the work we did to get this marriage, and now we have a useless brat in our hands and no way to get the money we wanted." Delilah gave a bitter laugh, her eyes shining with a cruelty that would make anyone shudder. "He's completely destroyed, Mother. He doesn't eat, he doesn't sleep, he can barely work. In a few weeks I can convince him to give me full power of attorney over the business." Esme, in her dark room, clutched her pillow tightly to her chest, trying to contain her sobs so she could keep listening. The room, which was already frightening during the day, now seemed even more threatening as she began to understand the real danger she was in. Downstairs, the two women continued their sinister conversation, their voices rising occasionally when they disagreed on some detail of their wicked plans. "And what are we going to do with the girl?" Agnes asked, her voice loaded with contempt. "We can't keep her here forever. It's getting too risky." Delilah emptied her wine glass, a cruel smile forming on her red-painted lips. "I have some contacts down south, people who don't ask too many questions and can take care of this." "Problem?" Esme's heart froze when she heard those words, understanding for the first time that her life was truly in danger. Agnes sat back down, leaning forward with renewed interest. And how long do we have to resolve this situation? Delilah checked her phone, looking at some messages. Marshall is completely in my hands now. Soon I'll have full access to the accounts and the companies. After that, she made a dismissive gesture with her hand, as if brushing off something insignificant. Esme bit her lip hard to keep from screaming, her small hands trembling with fear. The sound of footsteps upstairs made the two women lower their voices. "The brat should be sleeping," Agnes muttered, annoyed. "Tomorrow I'll make her clean the whole house as punishment." Delilah smiled, a wicked gleam in her eyes. "Don't worry, Mom. Soon we won't have to worry about her anymore." Esme recoiled from the vent pipe, her heart beating so hard it felt like it would explode. Agnes poured more wine for both of them, the bottle making an ominous sound as it poured the dark liquid. "And if someone starts asking questions?" "That teacher from her school, for instance, keeps calling for news." Delilah made a dismissive gesture with her hand. "I've already taken care of that. Everyone believes the poor thing died in the accident. I have all the necessary documents to prove it." The smile they shared made Esme tremble from head to toe. The hours dragged on as the two women continued their grim conversation. Esme remained motionless in her room, each word she heard increasing her despair. Her father, whom she loved so dearly and who had always protected her, now believed she was dead. And she, trapped in that house with two women who were planning her demise, felt more alone and scared than ever before. "I need to get out of here," she thought to herself, tears silently streaming down her face. "I need to find a way to escape before they... Minutes later, Delilah rose from the sofa after finishing a call that came from one of the family's lawyers. "Look at this, Mother. What great news. Marshall has already signed a power of attorney giving me control over several accounts. He's so distraught that he barely read what he was signing." Agnes examined the documents with a satisfied smile, while Esme, still clinging to the ventilation pipe, felt her heart tighten as she thought of her father's anguish. "Her lawyer didn't suspect anything?" asked Agnes, leafing through the papers with interest. Delilah let out a cold laugh. "That old fool! He's more worried about Marshall's emotional state than the documents. He thinks I'm being a devoted wife, taking care of everything while he recovers from his grief." Esme clenched her fists tightly, a rage she had never felt before starting to replace the fear in her heart. Agnes poured herself more wine, her eyes gleaming with greed. "And how long until we have access to everything?" Delilah consulted some papers, doing mental calculations. 2 weeks at most. That's the time I need for him to sign over the main companies. After that, she paused, exchanging a significant look with her mother. "After that, we can start getting rid of our little problem upstairs." The floor seemed to spin beneath Esme's feet. She stumbled away from the pipe, trying to control her ragged breathing. In her mind, images of her father signing papers without knowing he was being deceived mingled with the fear of what those cruel women planned to do with her. "Daddy," she whispered to herself, "please wake up. Please come find me. I'm very worried, my daughter. And where are we going to send the brat?" Agnes's voice echoed through the pipe again. Delilah lowered her tone, but Esme could still hear her threatening words. "As I told you, Mother, I have a contact in the south of the country, a very isolated farm that's always in need of child labor." The casual way she spoke about the fate of a 6-year-old made Esme feel nauseous. Agnes seemed pleased with the plan. "And when do you plan to retrieve her?" Delilah consulted her phone again. "As soon as I have the main powers of attorney signed. We can't risk anything going wrong now. Marshall needs to keep believing his little princess is dead and buried in that cemetery." The two women laughed, a sound that made Esme shrink even further into her dark room. The grandfather clock in the living room chimed 10 o'clock, and Agnes stood up to pour more wine. "The only thing that worries me," she said, "is if the girl tries to run away before then. She's been awfully quiet lately." Delilah dismissed the concern with a casual wave. "And where would she go? She's just a stupid child. Besides, the gate is always locked, and the wall is too high." The words of the two women pierced Esme's soul like sharp daggers. Every laugh, every cruel plan they discussed so casually, increased her determination to find a way to escape. She dragged herself to the window of her room, gazing at the tall wall that surrounded the property. It seemed impossible to climb, but she knew she would have to try. Her life depended on it. Delilah began gathering the documents, organizing them carefully in her folder. "I'm going back to the mansion now. Marshall is probably having another one of his nightmares about the accident. It's always good to be around during those moments. Make sure he keeps relying on me for everything." The disdain in her voice when speaking of her father's suffering made Esme feel a mixture of anger and determination she had never experienced before. Agnes walked her daughter to the door, making plans for the next few days. "Keep me updated on every paper he signs," she said, "and don't worry about the brat. I'll make sure she doesn't cause any trouble until she's no longer our responsibility." The sound of their laughter echoed through the house as Esme, in her room, began silently planning her escape. After the sound of Delilah's car faded into the night, Esme remained awake in her room, each minute weighing like hours. The darkness felt suffocating, but she dared not turn on the light. Agnes always grew furious when she caught her awake past curfew. Lying on her hard bed, the girl tried to control the tremors in her hands as she mentally went over everything she had overheard. The idea of being sent to a remote farm where she would be forced to work made her small body tremble with fear. Through the barred window, the moon partially illuminated the room, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Esme stared at the tall garden wall, trying to memorize every detail she could see. During the day, when Agnes forced her to do heavy labor in the garden, she had noticed an old tree near the wall. Its branches were thick and looked strong enough to support the weight of a small child. "Could I make it?" she thought, her heart racing at the mere idea of the height. The sound of Agnes's footsteps downstairs made Esme shrink further under the thin covers. She could hear the older woman talking on the phone, probably to Delilah, planning more details of their cruel scheme. The muffled voice reached her room. "Yes, she's locked in. No, there's no way she can escape. In 2 weeks it will all be settled." Each word increased the girl's desperation as she bit her lip to keep from crying. She couldn't let on that she was awake, couldn't let them suspect that she knew everything. Images of her father signing papers, deceived by Delilah, tormented her thoughts. She remembered how he always used to say she was his brave little princess, how he taught her to face her fears. "Daddy," she whispered to herself so low she could barely hear her own voice, "I'll find a way to come back to you, I promise." The tears silently streaming down her face were a mixture of fear and determination. Creaking on the staircase made Esme hold her breath. Agnes was climbing up to her room, her heavy footsteps echoing through the old house. The girl squeezed her eyes shut, pretending to sleep, as she heard the key turning in the lock. The door opened for a moment. Agnes always did this final check before retiring. Satisfied to see the prisoner apparently asleep, the woman closed the door again, the sound of the turning key sounding like a sentence for Esme. When Agnes's footsteps finally faded away, Esme opened her eyes again, her mind working frantically. During the day, she had noticed that one of the floorboards near the window was loose. There she began to store small things that could be useful: a piece of stale bread from dinner, an old shoelace she found in the garden, a few coins she had managed to take from Agnes's coat pocket when doing laundry. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. The clock downstairs marked the hours with a muffled sound, reminding Esme that her time was running out. 2 weeks, they had said. In 2 weeks, people would come to take her to that distant farm. The thought made her stomach churn with fear. She needed to find a way to escape before then, but how? The wall was so high, the window bars so firm, Agnes's vigilance so constant. A car passed on the distant street, its headlights creating strange patterns on the ceiling. Esme followed the lights with her eyes, imagining where that car might be going, dreaming of the freedom she had lost. She thought of her school, her friends, the Christmas play that never happened. More than anything, she thought of her father, alone in that huge mansion, suffering from the belief that she was dead. Sleep finally began to overtake Esme, but even as she drifted off, her mind kept working. The tree in the garden, the loose floorboard, the moments when Agnes was distracted by her soap operas. Each detail was a piece of a puzzle she needed to solve, and she needed to solve it quickly. Her life depended on it. Her last conscious thought was a silent promise to herself. "I'll be brave, Daddy. I'll find a way back to you no matter what." The opportunity Esme had been waiting for finally came on a Sunday night, when Agnes fell asleep earlier than usual after taking her sleeping pills. The girl waited, counting the minutes in absolute silence until she heard the woman's snores echoing down the hallway. With trembling hands, she removed the loose floorboard and took her few belongings: the stale bread, the coins, and the shoelace she had been saving. Her heart was pounding so hard she feared Agnes might hear it, even in her sleep. Using the old shoelace, Esme tied one end to the window bar and the other around her slender waist. If she fell from the tree, at least she would have something to try and hold on to. Opening the window was the hardest part. She had spent weeks putting cooking oil on the hinges whenever she cleaned the room, but the old metal still creaked slightly. The girl froze for a moment, waiting to see if Agnes had woken up. The night's silence was broken only by the distant snores. The cold night wind stung her face as she finally managed to squeeze through the window. The tree seemed farther away than it looked during the day, and Esme had to stretch as far as she could to reach the nearest branch. Her small fingers gripped the rough wood as she summoned all her courage for the leap. "Be brave," she whispered to herself, remembering her father's words. With a desperate lunge, she propelled herself toward the branch. The impact against the tree nearly knocked the wind out of her, but she managed to cling to the branch with all her might. Descending the tree was a torture. Every move made her body ache, and any snap of a twig made her pause, her heart almost leaping out of her mouth. When she finally reached the last branch, she realized it was still too high from the ground. There was no choice, she had to jump. The dull thud of her fall was cushioned by the grass, but her legs still trembled from the impact. Getting to the wall was the scariest part. There was no moon that night, and the darkness of the garden seemed to swallow her. Every shadow could be Agnes awake, every noise could be someone discovering her. Esme used the vines covering the wall as support, her small hands bleeding as she forced herself to climb. The top of the wall seemed to get further away with every attempt, but she couldn't give up, not now that she was so close to freedom. When she finally reached the top of the wall, Esme looked down and felt her stomach turn. On the other side, the street seemed impossibly distant. A fall from that height could be fatal. For a moment, she thought about going back, but the memory of the conversation she'd overheard between Delilah and Agnes made her continue. Better to die trying to escape than to be taken to that farm, she thought, gathering her last strength to begin the descent. The fall on the other side of the wall was more painful. Esme felt her ankle twist when she hit the ground, and she had to bite her lip hard not to scream in pain. She was free, but now came the hardest part. Where to go? She had never been in that part of the city before, and all the streets looked the same in the darkness. She chose a random direction and began to limp, trying to get as far away as possible before Agnes discovered her escape. The empty streets echoed with her lone steps as she dragged herself away from the mansion. Every car that passed made her hide in the shadows, fearing it was Delilah or Agnes looking for her. Her ankle throbbed with every step, and the cold of the early morning began to penetrate her thin clothes. "Please, Daddy," she whispered through tears, "help me find you." The sky was beginning to lighten when Esme finally reached a more lively area of the city. Her feet were hurting so much, and she could barely keep walking. A few early risers were already circulating through the streets, but no one seemed to notice the dirty, injured girl dragging herself along the sidewalk. She approached a woman who was setting up the tables at her cafe, gathering the courage to ask for help. "Please, ma'am, I'm hungry." The woman looked at her with disdain. "Get out of here, you beggar. You'll scare away my customers." Esme shrank from the harsh words, tears streaming down her dirty face. She wasn't used to this kind of treatment. In her former life, everyone treated her like a little princess. Now dirty and ragged, she was just another street kid in people's eyes. Tired and starving, she hid in a dark alley, shivering with cold and fear. "How will I find my dad like this?" she thought, hugging her knees to her chest as the sun rose over the city that now seemed bigger and scarier than ever. The morning sun brought no comfort to Esme. Her stomach ached with hunger. The hard piece of bread she'd brought was gone hours ago. With the few coins she'd managed to save, she tried to buy something at a bakery. The clerk chased her out before she could even show the money. "Get out of here. We don't want beggars scaring the customers first thing in the morning." People on the sidewalk averted their eyes from her as if she were invisible, some even crossing the street to avoid passing near her. An elegantly dressed woman exited a restaurant carrying a bag of leftovers. Esme approached her timidly, her dirty clothes contrasting with the lady's fine attire. "Please, I haven't eaten anything since yesterday." The woman clutched her purse closer to her body, as if Esme were a petty criminal. "Get away from me, you filthy thing. You must be riddled with diseases." The restaurant's security guard came running, threatening to call the police if she didn't disappear from there immediately. The smell of food wafting from the restaurants was a constant torture. Esme wandered the streets, her legs growing weaker with every step. When she tried to drink water from a public fountain, a man shoved her away. "That's not for you lot. Go drink water somewhere else, you brat." She nearly fell to the ground in shock. Tears mingled with the dirt on her face as she dragged herself away. A group of children exited a private school, carrying expensive lunchboxes and backpacks. Esme recognized the uniform. It was similar to the one she used to wear in her former life. One of the girls noticed her and pointed, laughing. "You, look at that. How can anyone live like that?" The other children joined in the mockery, some even pretending to vomit as they passed by her. The waiting parents shot looks of disdain, as if her mere presence could contaminate their perfectly clean children. The afternoon sun was relentless, and Esme sought shelter under an awning. The store owner came out furious, throwing a bucket of water at the spot where she was sitting. "Go sleep somewhere else. This isn't a shelter." Drenched and shivering, she stumbled along the sidewalk, people parting to make way for her as if she carried some contagious disease. One woman even pulled her granddaughter away, whispering loud enough for Esme to hear. "Don't look at that girl, sweetie. She must be a little junkie." Desperate for food, Esme approached a fruit stand. The vendor was distracted with other customers, and she thought about taking just one apple. Before she could reach for the fruit, she felt a strong hand grab her arm. "Ah, you little thief. Thought I didn't see you?" The man shook a rag at her to shoo her away like an animal, drawing the attention of passers-by. "I'm calling the police. You'll learn that a place for tramps is in jail." As night fell, the cold began to seep through her still damp clothes. Esme found an old cardboard box in an alley and tried to take shelter, but was kicked out by other homeless people. "This spot is ours, you brat. Go find your corner somewhere else." She limped away, her sprained ankle throbbing more and more. The lights from restaurants and shops cast eerie shadows, and every passerby seemed like a potential threat. Exhaustion was starting to overcome Esme when she finally found a place to hide. A gap between two buildings, partially covered by an old tarp. Her stomach growled painfully, and the thirst was almost unbearable. The few coins she had brought were useless. No one wanted to accept money from the dirty hands of a street kid. "Daddy," she whispered in the dark, "how will I find you like this? No one even wants to look at me." A police siren sounded nearby, making Esme cower further into her hiding spot. She couldn't be found. If the police caught her, they would surely send her back to Delilah and Agnes. The night seemed even colder than the previous one, and the sounds of the big city were frightening for a girl accustomed to the silence of luxurious mansions. Every shadow could be a danger. Every footstep on the sidewalk could be someone coming to hurt her. "Someone, please," she silently begged. "Someone has to believe me." The night in the city was different from anything Esme had ever experienced. The gap between the buildings where she had hidden offered no protection from the icy wind that sliced through her thin clothes. Strange sounds echoed down the street, loud laughter from drunks, distant fights, barking dogs, occasional sirens. Each noise made her cower further, imagining it could be Agnes or Delilah searching for her. Her body shivered uncontrollably, both from cold and fear. A group of teenagers passed by on the street, laughing loudly and kicking empty cans. One of them noticed the movement in the dark gap where Esme was hiding. "Hey, there's someone over there." They approached, cell phone flashlights pointed in her direction. The girl tried to hide further, but there was nowhere to run. "Look, it's just some dirty brat," one of them laughed. Another picked up an empty bottle and threw it at her. "Get out of here, you filthy thing. This neighborhood ain't no place for beggars." The glass shattered near her, some shards cutting her already bruised arms. The hunger was a constant ache in her stomach, but worse than that was the thirst. Her lips were cracked and her throat burned. A light drizzle began to fall, and Esme stretched out her small, dirty hands, trying to catch some drops to drink. The cardboard she was using for shelter soon became soaked, leaving her even colder and more miserable. How I wish I was home, she thought, remembering her warm, cozy room, her father's embraces. Even Agnes's hard bed seemed like a luxury now. A stray dog approached, sniffing the scent of tears and despair. Esme tensed up at first, but the animal seemed just as lost as her. Shyly, she reached out to pet it, desperate for any kind of comfort. The dog came closer, its wet fur brushing against her legs. For a moment, she felt a little less alone. But then heavy footsteps approached, and the animal fled in fright, leaving her in her utter solitude once more. The early morning hours dragged on, each minute feeling like an eternity. Esme fought against sleep. Dozing off would mean becoming vulnerable, and she couldn't afford that luxury. But her eyes were heavy, her head pounding with hunger and fatigue. In her near-unconscious moments, she dreamed of her father. She saw him crying in his empty mansion, deceived by Delilah, believing his little princess was dead. "Daddy," she mumbled between sobs, "I'm alive. Why doesn't anyone believe me?" A luxury car drove slowly down the street, and for one terrifying moment, Esme thought it might be Delilah's car. She curled up so tightly her ribs ached, holding her breath until the vehicle disappeared around the corner. Her heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would explode. Every minute, the fear of being found by her tormentors battled with the fear of never being found by anyone who cared about her. The early morning chill was merciless, seeping into her very bones. Her wet clothes clung to her small, battered body, and she couldn't stop shivering. A drunken man stumbled past, nearly tripping over her. "Get out of the way, you pest!" he yelled, kicking the cardboard that was her only shelter. Esme dragged herself deeper into the gap, her heart racing with fear. People who had once treated her like a princess now saw her as less than a stray animal. The first rays of sunlight found Esme in a pitiful state. Her hair, once always well-groomed, was matted and filthy. Her clothes, torn and muddy, barely protected her from the cold. Her feet, inside the soaked shoes, were covered in blisters. But worse than any physical discomfort was the pain in her heart. The pain of knowing her father was suffering, believing a lie, while she wandered the streets, invisible to the world. The city was waking up for another day. Hurried people rushed along the sidewalks, some talking on their expensive cell phones, others carrying coffee in disposable cups that cost more than all the coins Esme had managed to collect. No one looked towards the dark gap, where a 6-year-old girl was battling sleep and hunger. It was as if she had ceased to exist the moment she became a beggar. The noise of a nearby garbage truck made Esme awaken from her torpor. People were starting to open their shops, and she knew she needed to get out of there before being expelled again. But where to go? How to survive another day on these cruel streets? How to find her father when everyone treated her as if she were invisible? Dragging herself out of her hiding place, she looked up at the morning sky, a last tear running down her dirty face. "I need to be strong," she whispered to herself. "I need to survive until I find my father. He has to know I'm alive." Agnes woke up later than usual that morning, her head heavy from the sleeping pills from the night before. The silence in the house immediately disturbed her. She would normally already hear Esme doing her morning chores. She went upstairs stomping, ready to punish the girl for her laziness. "You lazy pest, it's way past time to—" The words died in her throat when she opened the bedroom door and found the bed empty. The room was in complete disarray. The open window letting in the cold morning wind, the curtains swaying like ghosts. Agnes ran to the window, her eyes widening as she saw the shoelace still tied to the grate. No, no, no. Her hands were shaking as she picked up her phone to call Delilah. On the other end of the line, her daughter was still asleep, unaware of the unfolding disaster. "Delilah, the brat ran away. That damn girl managed to escape." Delilah arrived at the mansion in record time, her car screeching into the driveway. Her normally composed face was twisted in anger and fear. The two women frantically searched the room, looking for clues. Agnes found the loose floorboard, revealing Esme's tiny hiding place. "Look at that! The little pest was planning this!" she screamed, kicking the wood angrily. Delilah examined the window bars, noticing the oil on the hinges. That clever little rat! She must have spent weeks preparing this. Panic was starting to take over the two women. Agnes paced back and forth, pulling her hair. If she's found, if someone recognizes her... Delilah cut her off with a slap on the table. Shut up, Mother. We need to think. But her own face betrayed the fear she felt. Her entire careful plan could unravel if Esme was found and told her story. How long has it been since you last saw her? She asked, trying to stay calm. Agnes struggled to remember through the fog of sleeping pills. Last night. No, dinner time. I gave her food and locked her room as usual. Delilah examined the window again, mentally calculating. So she has several hours head start. She could be anywhere in the city by now. The thought made both women pale. A 6-year-old child alone on the streets, carrying a secret that could destroy them. The sound of a passing car made them both run to the window. Every vehicle could be the police. Every person on the sidewalk could have seen Esme. Delilah grabbed her phone, quickly dialing. I need to get some contacts looking for her. But it has to be discreet. No one can know who she is. Agnes continued pacing, muttering non-stop. What if she's already found someone? What if she's already told them everything? We'll be arrested, Delilah. Delilah grabbed her mother's arms firmly, shaking her. Get a hold of yourself. That brat is alone on the streets, dirty and scared. No one is going to believe some little urchin. But even as she said it, her own heart pounded with fear. All her plans, all the money she was about to get from Marshall, it all depended on finding Esme before it was too late. Delilah's first contact started returning her calls. She organized a silent search through the city, promising generous rewards for anyone who found the girl. Agnes finally managed to calm down enough to think clearly. And Marshall? What are you going to tell him if he asks why you're not at the mansion today? Delilah gave a cold smile. Don't worry about him. He's so devastated thinking his daughter is dead that he hardly notices when I'm gone. The two women went downstairs to the kitchen, needing to plan their next steps. Agnes brewed strong coffee while Delilah spread a map of the city across the table. She can't have gone far, she muttered, marking areas for her contacts to search. A little kid alone with no money. She must be in some alley nearby, but her voice betrayed the uncertainty she felt. Deep down, she knew that every minute that passed was one more minute for Esme to get further away, to possibly find someone who would believe her story. Agnes set 2 steaming mugs of coffee on the table with shaking hands. What if she manages to get to Marshall? If she tells him she's alive? Delilah looked up from the map, her face a mask of cruel determination. She won't. We're going to find that little pest before that, even if we have to turn over every alley in this city. And when we do, her voice lowered to a threatening whisper, she'll wish she never tried to run away. At the Whitmore mansion, Marshall spent another day consumed by his grief. The empty hallways echoed with memories of Esme, every corner of the house holding souvenirs that now tortured him. Sitting in his study, he stared at a pile of his daughter's toys and clothes that he still couldn't bear to donate. The thought of other children using his little princess's things always made him put off that decision. But that morning, something different began to stir in his devastated heart. "Sir, I've brought your breakfast tray," said the housekeeper, setting the untouched meal beside several others. Marshall barely ate since learning of Esme's death, his red, sleepless eyes fixed on the toys. How many children on the streets never got a Christmas present, he thought, remembering how privileged his daughter had always been. An idea started forming in his mind. Perhaps he could honor Esme's memory by doing something meaningful. The decision to go in disguise came naturally. Marshall didn't want media attention, didn't want his charitable acts becoming headlines about the kind millionaire. He just wanted to feel like he was doing something his daughter would approve of, something that could give the smallest sense of purpose to his empty days. In his closet, he ignored the expensive suits and began gathering old worn clothes he wore on his rare trips to the country. His hands trembled as he applied a fake beard and makeup to conceal his recognizable features. In the mirror, an unrecognizable man stared back at him, someone who could blend in among the less fortunate. "Is this what you would have wanted, Princess?" he murmured to the reflection, imagining the proud smile Esme would have given at seeing him help other children. The ache in his chest was still unbearable, but now he had a purpose, however small. The driver, the only staff member who knew of his plan, loaded the back of a nondescript van with the donations. Marshall had carefully selected each item: warm clothes, toys in good condition, blankets, and even some non-perishable foods. "Where to first, sir?" the driver asked. Marshall gazed out the window at the overcast sky. "To the places no one else goes, where people need the most help." While the van drove through the poorer streets of the city, Marshall felt his heart tighten. Every child he saw reminded him of Esme. Every dirty and hungry little face made him think of how blessed his daughter had been with so much. "Stop here," he ordered the driver when he spotted a group of homeless people sheltering under a marquee. His legs trembled as he got out of the car. It was the first time he had really left home since learning of his princess's death. With hesitant steps, Marshall began distributing the first gifts. The expressions of surprise and gratitude on the people's faces moved him, but he kept his head down, hiding the tears that stubbornly threatened to fall. An elderly lady held his hands as she received a warm blanket. "God bless you, my son. Few still look out for us." Marshall merely nodded, his throat too tight to respond. At each stop, with each gift delivered, Marshall felt a small spark of life return to his devastated heart. It wasn't happiness. He doubted he could feel that again without his daughter. But it was a purpose. Something to keep him functioning, to prevent him from completely losing himself in his grief. "You would be proud, my princess," he thought, as he watched a child joyfully hug a teddy bear very similar to the one Esme had loved so much. The van continued its way through the city, stopping in alleys and underpasses, where the most needy took shelter. Marshall mechanically distributed the gifts, but every smile he received in return was like a small bandage on his shattered heart. "You are an angel, sir," said a mother as she received warm clothes for her children. Marshall shook his head, his voice hoarse with emotion. "No, just someone trying to honor the memory of an angel I lost." The sun was beginning to set as the van arrived at a square where several homeless people were sheltering. Marshall had already distributed most of the gifts, but there were still some dolls and warm clothes left in the trunk. His disguise was perfect. No one could imagine that this humble-looking, scruffy-bearded man was one of the wealthiest businessmen in the United States. As he approached the group, he noticed several children playing near a broken bench. The cold afternoon wind ruffled the leaves of the trees as Marshall began distributing the last gifts. For each child, he tried to choose something special, something that could bring a little joy to their difficult lives. A girl received a red coat and smiled, making his heart clench. It was the same color Esme had worn on the night of the accident. He had to turn away for a moment, disguising the tears that threatened to fall. People crowded around him, grateful for the unexpected gifts. Marshall kept his head down, avoiding looking directly at their faces. Every child he saw made his pain seem even more unbearable. In his hands, he held the last doll he had brought. It was a simple rag doll, but it had been one of Esme's favorites when she was younger. He had hesitated a lot before including it in the donations. It was then that he noticed a small, huddled figure near a tree, a little apart from the others. The girl was dirty, and her dark hair was tangled, but something about her solitary posture deeply moved him. Marshall approached slowly, holding the doll carefully. The child kept her face down, hugging her knees to her chest as if trying to protect herself from the world. "Hey, little one," he called softly, his voice choked with the day's emotion. "I have a gift for you." He knelt in front of the girl, extending the doll towards her. The setting sun cast long shadows across the square, and the wind carried dried leaves around them. For a moment, everything seemed to fall silent. The girl raised her face slowly, and her eyes met Marshall's. There was something familiar in that gaze, something that made his heart stop for a second. Before he could process what he was feeling, the child's voice cut through the air like a whisper that would change everything. "Daddy, I know it's you." The world seemed to freeze at that moment. Marshall stood paralyzed, the doll trembling in his hands as his brain tried to process what was happening. The girl's eyes, those eyes he knew so well, stared back at him through the dirt and weariness. "Va Esme?" His voice came out as a strangled whisper, the disguise of his fake beard brushing against his trembling face. "My princess, is that you?" Esme threw herself into her father's arms with such force that they nearly fell. Marshall held her as if his life depended on it, feeling his daughter's small, frail body sob against his chest. His tears began to smear the disguise makeup, but he no longer cared. "You're alive," he repeated through sobs, his hands shaking as he stroked his daughter's tangled hair. "Oh God, you're alive. The driver, sensing the situation, quickly pulled the van closer to shield them from prying eyes. Marshall picked Esme up, feeling how light and fragile she was, and carried her into the vehicle. His legs could barely support him as he walked, the reality of the moment hitting him in successive waves of shock and joy. "Daddy," Esme kept repeating, her little hands clinging tightly to his tattered shirt as if afraid he might disappear. Inside the van, Marshall was finally able to get a good look at his daughter. His heart broke at the sight of the bruises, the dirty and torn clothes, the wounded feet in worn-out shoes. "What did they do to you, my princess?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion and rising anger. Esme trembled in his arms, both from emotion and exhaustion. The driver turned on the heater and handed her a water bottle, which the girl drank greedily. "Delilah." Esme began to speak, but her voice faltered. Marshall held her tighter, feeling her little heart racing. Memories of the past few months began fitting together in his mind, like pieces of a macabre puzzle. The accident, the coma, the supposed funeral, the devastating grief he had felt, believing his princess was dead. "Tell me everything, my love," he whispered, wiping the tears from his daughter's dirty little face. "Daddy's here now. No one's going to hurt you anymore." Esme began recounting her story through sobs. The captivity at Agnes's house, the mistreatment, the desperate escape, the days on the streets. With each word, Marshall felt his heart clench tighter, a mix of guilt for not realizing the diabolical plan and growing rage at everything his little one had suffered. They made you believe I had died," Esme said, her small voice laden with sadness. "I heard them saying they wanted your money, Dad." The driver drove aimlessly around the city, keeping a distance from crowded areas while father and daughter reunited. Marshall removed the fake beard and wiped his face, revealing himself fully to Esme. Tears continued streaming as he examined every bruise, every mark his princess carried. "I'm sorry, my love," his voice cracked with emotion. "I'm so sorry for not protecting you, for believing that." A cell phone began ringing, interrupting the moment. Marshall looked at the screen and his blood ran cold. It was Delilah. Esme shrank at the sound of the ringtone, clinging even tighter to her father. "It's her, Dad," she whispered fearfully. "She's looking for me. Her and Agnes are searching the whole city for me." Marshall looked at his daughter, then at the phone that kept ringing. His face transformed into a mask of fierce determination. "Don't worry, my princess. Now it's our turn to make them pay for everything." Marshall took a deep breath, trying to control the tremor in his voice before answering the phone. Esme huddled on the van's seat, her wide eyes fixed on the device in terror. "Hi, honey." Delilah's saccharine voice came from the other end. "I stopped by home and couldn't find you. I got worried." Marshall gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white, forcing himself to keep his voice calm. "I needed to get out for some air, clear my head. But you haven't left the house in weeks," Delilah went on, a note of barely concealed anxiety in her voice. "Is everything okay?" Marshall looked at Esme, who was trembling slightly by his side, and felt a wave of hatred so intense that for a moment it was hard to breathe. "I'm really missing her today," he managed to say, his voice choked, but not for the reason Delilah thought. "I needed to move around a little." Delilah took the cue to play her role as the devoted wife. "Oh, honey, I understand. It must be so hard." Her falsely sweet voice made Marshall's stomach churn. Esme inched closer to her father, seeking protection at the sound of her stepmother's voice. Marshall pulled her into a one-armed embrace, feeling his daughter's small body tremble. "Yes, it's hard," he replied curtly, every word an effort not to scream all the truths he now knew. "Do you want me to come find you?" Delilah asked, and Marshall could imagine her fake smile on the other end of the line. "We can visit her grave together." Upon hearing this, Esme stifled a sob, and Marshall had to cover the phone for a moment so Delilah wouldn't hear. The mention of the fake grave, now knowing the whole truth, made his blood boil. "No," he responded too quickly, then softened his tone. "No, I need this moment alone." The conversation continued for a few agonizing minutes, with Delilah distilling false words of comfort, while Marshall struggled to keep his voice steady. Each "my love" of hers felt like a stab. Each mention of Esme's death was like poison in his ears. The driver continued driving around the city, keeping distance from the areas Delilah used to frequent. "I'll be back home later," Marshall finally managed to say. I need to think a little." "Of course, love," Delilah replied, her voice now betraying a hint of relief. "Just don't take too long, okay? You know how worried I get." Marshall looked at Esme, at the bruises on her arms, at her dirty and torn clothes, at the fear still present in her eyes. Delilah's concern was as fake as the empty grave in the cemetery. "Don't worry," he replied, his voice as cold as ice. "I'll be home when you least expect it." After hanging up, Marshall threw the phone onto the seat with violence, finally allowing all his rage to surface. His hands were shaking, no longer from emotion, but from a fury he had never felt before. All the grief, all the pain he had felt over the past months was turning into an overwhelming hatred. Esme, frightened by her father's outburst, gently touched his arm. "Daddy?" Marshall turned to her, forcing himself to soften his expression. "I'm sorry, Princess, it's just that—" His voice faltered. "That woman," Marshall finally managed to say, each word laced with venom, "will pay for every tear you've shed. Her and her mother will bitterly regret the day they planned to hurt us." Esme snuggled closer to him, seeking the warmth and protection she had missed so much. The driver, who was watching everything through the rearview mirror, discreetly asked, "Where to now, sir?" Marshall looked at his daughter, then at the city skyline. His face transformed into a mask of fierce determination. "To a safe place. I have some important phone calls to make." The van parked at a discreet hotel on the outskirts of the city. Marshall watched Esme sleeping on the back seat, exhausted after everything she had been through. Every soft breath from his daughter, every mark on her bruised little face, fueled a growing storm in his heart. Delilah's last sweet and false words still echoed in his ears, turning into bile in his mouth. Months of mourning, endless nights crying over the loss of his princess, all based on a cruel and calculated lie. Memories began to invade his mind like painful flashes. Delilah comforting him during the fake funeral, pretending to cry as she threw dirt on the empty coffin, bringing him sleeping pills when nightmares kept him awake. Every moment of false comfort, every word of false compassion had been part of a diabolical plan. His hands clenched into fists so tight that his nails cut his palms, but he barely felt the physical pain. It was nothing compared to the agony now turning into a cold fury. His daughter's face told a story of suffering he could barely stand to look at. The sunken eyes of someone who had gone hungry, the purple bruises on her small arms, the fear still present even in sleep. Esme stirred restlessly, murmuring in her dreams, and Marshall had to hold back a sob of rage. His princess, his only daughter, had been kept captive, forced to work like a slave, then abandoned on the streets, all while he cried in front of an empty grave. The signatures he had given Delilah in the past few days, the documents he had barely read through his tears, it all made sense now. Each of her smiles hid a venomous snake. Each gesture of affection masked a criminal mind. Marshall could feel the bile rising in his throat as he remembered how she had manipulated him in his most vulnerable moments, using his grief as a weapon against himself. The mourning that had consumed him was turning into something darker, more powerful. The last few months had passed like a movie in his mind. The sleepless nights, the days lost in the darkness of depression, the unbearable emptiness he had felt believing his daughter was dead. All that suffering had been orchestrated, every moment of despair carefully planned by Delilah and her mother. The love he had once felt for her, had it ever been real, now transformed into a hatred so deep it physically hurt. Esme stirred again in her sleep, a small moan escaping her lips. Marshall moved closer, adjusting the blanket over her, and noticed the rope marks on her wrists, evidence of how she had been tied up during her escape. Something inside him snapped like breaking ice. The pain that had paralyzed him for months now crystallized into icy determination. His tears dried up, replaced by a cold fire in his eyes. The sun was beginning to set, casting orange shadows through the van's windows. Marshall watched the horizon, his face a stone mask. Every moment of weakness he had shown in the last few months had been used against him. Every tear he had shed had been a source of satisfaction for those cruel women. The anger grew inside him like a dark wave, washing everything else away. In her sleep, Esme whispered, "Daddy," her little hand instinctively reaching for his. Marshall entwined his fingers with hers, feeling how calloused they were from forced labor. Each callus was a testament to Delilah and Agnes's cruelty. Each mark on her skin, a silent accusation against those who should have cared for her. The hatred pulsed through his veins like an icy poison. The driver returned with some clean clothes and food for Esme. Marshall eyed the items with hard eyes. His daughter, heir to one of America's greatest fortunes, reduced to needing basic handouts. The transformation within him was complete. The man broken by grief was dead, replaced by someone driven by calculated, cold fury. Delilah had stolen months of his life, months of his daughter's life, and every second would be repaid. The phone vibrated again. Another message from Delilah asking when he would be coming home. Marshall looked at the screen with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The woman who had destroyed his life, who had tortured his daughter, still believed she had control over him. She didn't yet know her own trap had closed, that her charade had come to an end. The last ray of sunlight disappeared over the horizon, leaving only darkness. A darkness that perfectly reflected what now inhabited Marshall's heart. The Whitmore mansion's clock struck 9 p.m. as Marshall's car passed through the gates. Delilah was in the living room, pacing nervously back and forth, her cell phone in hand, still trying to locate Esme. The sound of the engine made her run to the window. Finally, her husband was back. She rehearsed her best worried wife smile, ready for another of her dedicated spouse performances. The front door burst open violently, causing Delilah to instinctively take a step back. Marshall entered first, his face a mask of controlled fury she had never seen before. But it was the small figure behind him that made Delilah's blood freeze in her veins. Esme, now clean and in fresh clothes, clutched her father's hand tightly. "No, it can't be," Delilah stammered, all color draining from her face. Marshall took a step forward, his eyes locked on Delilah like a predator watching its prey. "What's wrong, dear?" His voice was pure ice. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Esme pressed closer to her father, her eyes full of fear at the sight of her stepmother. Delilah stumbled backwards, her legs failing her. But she was. "You said—" Her words jumbled as her perfect plan crumbled before her eyes. The room started spinning around Delilah. Her hands groped for the sofa for support as her mind tried to process the scene in front of her. The girl who should have been trapped at her mother's house, the child whose fake funeral she had so carefully arranged, was there, alive, clinging to the hand of the father she had spent months manipulating. "This can't. It can't." Her last words came out in a whisper before her eyes rolled back and she collapsed to the living room floor. The thud of Delilah's body hitting the marble floor echoed through the mansion. Marshall made no move to help her, his hard eyes fixed on the unconscious woman who had destroyed his life. Esme flinched at seeing Delilah fall, memories of mistreatment still fresh in her mind. "It's okay, Princess," Marshall whispered to his daughter, his voice soft only when speaking to her. "She'll never hurt you again." The household staff, drawn by the noise, stood shocked in the living room entrance. The sight of Esme, believed by all to be dead, caused a stir of surprised exclamations. Marshall dismissed them with a curt wave. "Call a doctor," he ordered flatly. "Not to help her, but to make sure she's conscious when I show her exactly what I think of her lies." His voice carried a storm's promise that made everyone hurry to obey. While they waited for the doctor, Marshall led Esme up to her old bedroom, kept untouched since the accident. The girl ran to her bed, hugging her stuffed animals with tears in her eyes. Seeing his daughter back where she belonged further ignited Marshall's fury toward the unconscious woman downstairs. How could she, he thought, his hands clenching into fists. How could she be so monstrous? The doctor arrived in 15 minutes, finding Delilah still unconscious on the living room floor. After a quick examination, he confirmed it was only a fainting spell caused by the shock. "She should wake up soon," he informed, looking nervously at Marshall, who remained like a statue of contained fury. "Good," he replied, his voice blade-sharp, "because we have much to discuss when she wakes up." Delilah began to stir slightly, her eyes blinking as she regained consciousness. Marshall approached slowly, his shadow projecting over her like a silent threat. The moment she opened her eyes, she would confront not the broken man she had manipulated for months, but someone consumed by a thirst for justice that would make her diabolical plan seem like child's play. "Wake up, darling," he whispered, his voice laden with a dark promise. "We have a long reckoning ahead of us." Delilah's eyes opened slowly, reality crashing back in waves of panic as she saw Marshall standing over her. She tried to get up quickly, but her legs were still weak. "Marshall, I can explain," she began, but her words were cut off by the sound of an extremely expensive vase shattering against the wall, inches from her head. Marshall had thrown the object with such force that shards of porcelain flew across the room. "Explain!" Marshall's roar made the mansion's windows tremble. "Explain how you kidnapped my daughter, how you faked her death." Another object flew across the room, this time a framed photo of their wedding. The glass exploded as it hit the wall, just like the charade of their relationship. Delilah crawled backwards, trying to hide behind the couch. "Honey, you don't understand." "Don't call me honey!" Marshall advanced, knocking over a coffee table in his path. "You destroyed my life, made me believe my princess was dead." His hand grabbed a heavy silver candelabra, hurling it across the room. Delilah screamed, flinching as the object struck a mirror, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. "Please, Marshall, listen to me." The sound of destruction drew the servants again, but a murderous look from Marshall kept them at bay. He began tearing off the expensive jewelry he had given Delilah from her neck and wrists, flinging them at her feet with contempt. "Is this what you want, isn't it? Money, jewels? You only had to ask, you viper, why involve my daughter?" Each word was punctuated by the sound of something else breaking. Delilah tried to stand, her legs trembling. "You don't understand. I never wanted to hurt Esme." It was the wrong thing to say. Marshall grabbed an antique chair and hurled it against the wall with such force that the wood splintered. "Never wanted to hurt? Look at her injuries. Look what your mother did to my daughter." His voice was hoarse from shouting, but the fury only seemed to intensify. "Every day," Marshall began, his voice lowering to a dangerously controlled tone. "Every day you saw me suffer, saw me cry over my daughter's death, and what did you do?" He grabbed a priceless Chinese vase and threw it to the floor at her feet. "You consoled me, gave me medication, all part of your sick plan." Delilah tried to move towards the door, but Marshall blocked her path with a quick motion. The sound of shattering glass and splintering wood continued, as Marshall methodically destroyed every gift he had given Delilah, every symbol of their fraudulent marriage. "How you have no heart," he snarled, ripping a priceless painting she adored from the wall. "No soul!" The painting joined the debris on the floor. Delilah was crying now, but Marshall knew they were false tears, just like everything about her. "You know what's worse?" Marshall moved closer to her, his voice shaking with rage. "Not only did you kidnap my daughter, you mistreated her, made her work like a slave, a 6-year-old child." Each accusation was punctuated by more destruction, as if Marshall was trying to demolish not just the objects, but every moment of the lie they had lived together. The once luxurious, elegant living room now resembled a war zone. Shattered crystal, porcelain, and glass littered the floor like a layer of broken ice. Delilah stared in horror at the destruction around her, but Marshall wasn't done. He approached her, his face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "You're going to pay for every tear I cried believing my daughter was dead. For every night she went hungry and afraid in your mother's house." One final crash echoed through the mansion, as Marshall upended an entire bookshelf, spilling books and decorative objects across the floor. Delilah was cornered against the wall, trembling before the fury she had unleashed. "Marshall," she tried one last time, her voice faltering, "I can explain everything." He raised his hand, silencing her. "The only thing you'll explain," he growled, "is to the judge why you deserve to rot in jail." Marshall advanced on Delilah, who backed away amid the wreckage of the room. His voice, once explosive, now came out in a venomous whisper. "You know what disgusts me most about you, Delilah? It's that at no point did you think about the pain you were causing. A child, Delilah. You psychologically tortured a child." His eyes burned with a hatred that made the woman tremble from head to toe. "You're nothing but a criminal," he continued, kicking away the expensive designer shoes she so adored. "But an especially cruel one, because you didn't just kidnap my daughter, you made her believe she was alone in the world. Made her go hungry, cold, humiliated." Delilah tried to speak again, but Marshall cut her off with a brusque gesture. "Shut your mouth. Every word from you is venom, every gesture a lie." The sound of footsteps upstairs made Marshall glance briefly at the ceiling, knowing Esme was safe in her room. His face twisted into an even darker expression as he turned back to Delilah. "My daughter, that innocent little creature you tortured, spent days on the streets, days, begging for food, sleeping in the cold, being humiliated by strangers. And all the while you were here living in luxury, spending my money, pretending to be a grieving widow." Delilah stumbled toward the door, but Marshall reached her in 2 long strides, gripping her arm tightly. "Where do you think you're going?" "I'm not done yet." He dragged her to the table where they used to dine as a family, where so many times she had feigned sorrow over Esme's death. "Look around at all of this," he growled, "because it's the last time you set foot in this house. The last time you enjoy anything my money bought. You're leaving now," Marshall went on, his voice razor sharp. "You're walking out of here with only the clothes on your back, nothing more. Every piece of jewelry, every shoe, every dress I gave you stays. After all, they were bought with the money you were so eager to steal." Delilah was sobbing now, but Marshall showed no compassion. "And you know what's best? I'm going to make you pay it all back. Every single penny you spent." With a rough motion, Marshall began pushing Delilah toward the main door. "But don't think it's just money you're going to lose." "Oh no." His smile was icy. "You and your mother are going to rot in jail. I'll use every penny of my fortune, hire the best lawyers, mobilize all my connections to ensure that you two never see the light of day again." The mansion's door was violently opened, and Marshall practically threw Delilah out. "And you know what the best part is?" He leaned in, his face inches from hers. "While you're in your cell thinking about all your plans that went wrong, my daughter will be here, safe, loved, having everything you tried to steal from her, and you're going to have nothing." Delilah stumbled on the front steps, her legs barely holding her up. The rain was starting to fall, drenching her expensive dress. "Marshall, please." She tried one last time, but he was already closing the door. "Enjoy your last night of freedom, Delilah. Because tomorrow," his eyes glowed with a dark promise, "tomorrow your true nightmare begins." The door slammed shut, leaving Delilah alone in the rain. Inside the mansion, Marshall locked all the entrances, his movements methodical and controlled despite the rage still boiling in his veins. The sound of light footsteps on the stairs caught his attention. Esme was watching him, her big eyes full of concern. "It's over, Princess," he said, his voice instantly softening. "It's over." The rain picked up outside, washing away the last traces of Delilah from the Whitmore mansion. Marshall embraced his daughter, feeling her small heart beating against his. A flash of lightning briefly illuminated Delilah's solitary figure through the window, stumbling away into the storm. The nightmare was over for Esme, but for Delilah, it was only just beginning. The Whitmore mansion was unrecognizable on that Christmas Eve. The place that had been the scene of so much pain just weeks ago now overflowed with colorful lights and festive decorations. Marshall watched Esme helping the staff decorate the immense Christmas tree, his heart swelling with joy at every genuine laugh from his daughter. The physical wounds had healed, and slowly, the emotional ones were starting to mend as well. "Daddy, look," Esme called out, holding up a golden Christmas ornament that reflected the colorful lights. "It's just like the ones Mommy used to put on the tree." Marshall felt his eyes well up as he saw his princess reminiscing about happy moments with Carmen, his late wife. The nightmares about Agnes and Delilah were becoming increasingly rare, replaced by sweet memories of the past and hope for the future. "Your mother loved this time of year, Princess, and you're just like her." The mansion's kitchen was a flurry of activity. Marshall had insisted on personally preparing some of Esme's favorite dishes, even if it meant a bit of a mess in the pristine kitchen. The girl moved between helping with the decorations and supervising her dad in the kitchen, stealing bites of chocolate and laughing at his attempts to make star-shaped cookies. "Dad, I think these cookies look more like crooked clouds," she teased, making Marshall feign indignation. The presents under the tree multiplied by the hour. Marshall knew he was going overboard, but after everything his daughter had been through, he wanted to make up for every moment of sadness with dozens of joys. Esme, however, seemed more interested in helping wrap small gifts for the mansion's staff. "They deserve a happy Christmas too, don't they, Dad?" she said as she decorated the packages with colorful ribbons. Marshall felt his chest swell with pride. His princess hadn't lost her kindness despite everything. The scent of cinnamon and hot chocolate filled the mansion, mingling with the smell of the pine trees decorating every corner. Esme had insisted on hanging Christmas stockings for everyone, including a special one for her mother, Carmen. "She'll be here with us in spirit, won't she, Dad?" she asked, her eyes shining with a wisdom beyond her years. Marshall hugged her tightly, silently thanking the heavens for having his princess back. "She will, my love. She never really left us." The afternoon wore on, with father and daughter alternating between preparations and moments of pure fun. Marshall taught Esme how to make paper angels, fondly remembering the role she should have played in the school's Christmas pageant. "Next year, you'll be the most beautiful little angel of all," he promised, seeing his daughter's radiant smile. "But Daddy, I'm already your little angel, aren't I?" she replied, making his heart melt completely. The sound of Christmas carols echoed through the hallways, and Esme couldn't resist singing and dancing along, pulling her father into a twirl around the room. Her hair, now shiny and well-groomed again, flew as she spun, her crystalline laugh filling every corner of the house with joy. Marshall watched her in awe, thinking about how he had almost lost all these precious moments. "Did you know you're the best present I could ever get?" he said, making Esme beam even brighter. The last rays of sunlight poured in through the windows when Esme decided it was time to get ready for the feast. She had chosen a new red dress, the color she had always loved, now re-signified as a symbol no longer of trauma, but of celebration. "I'm going to look beautiful, just like a princess," she declared, running up the stairs. Marshall followed her with his gaze, his heart overflowing with love. "You already are a princess, my love, my warrior princess." The dining table was magnificently set, but in a different way than usual. No intimidating silver cutlery or formal arrangements. Marshall had made sure to create a cozy and childlike atmosphere, with colorful napkins and small Christmas decorations scattered across the table. Esme, already in her new red dress, clapped her hands in delight when she saw the cookies they had made together, decorating each place. "Daddy, you put our crooked cookies on the table?" Dinner was served, and for the first time in a long time, genuine laughter echoed through the dining room. Esme was animatedly telling stories between bites, her eyes shining with happiness. Marshall barely touched his own food, hypnotized by the transformation of his daughter. From the scared little girl he had found on the streets to this vivacious little princess. "You know, Daddy," she said as she grabbed another piece of turkey, "this is the best Christmas of my life." The staff had been invited to join the feast, breaking years of formal tradition at the mansion. Esme made sure to serve sweets to everyone, proudly offering the brownies she had helped make. "It's Grandma's recipe," she would announce to anyone who would listen. Marshall watched the scene with a full heart. His daughter had inherited not only the beauty, but also the kindness of his late wife. As the clock neared midnight, Esme's anticipation became palpable. She could barely stay seated, her eyes constantly straying to the mountain of presents under the tree. "Is it still a long time, Daddy?" she would ask every 5 minutes, making everyone laugh at her adorable impatience. Marshall would pretend to check his watch with utmost seriousness. "Let me see. I think Santa Claus should be arriving soon." The first chime of midnight had barely sounded when Esme was already kneeling by the tree, her eyes shining at the colorful packages. Marshall joined her on the floor, completely forgetting his important businessman demeanor. "Which one do we start with, Princess?" Esme picked up a medium-sized package wrapped in golden paper. "This one first, Daddy. It's special." It was a present she had prepared for her father herself, with the discreet help of the staff, an album filled with drawings and messages of love. Marshall felt tears in his eyes as he flipped through the pages, each drawing telling a story of her love and gratitude. "Look, Daddy," she pointed to a particular drawing. "That's you saving me, like a superhero." Marshall hugged her tightly, his heart overflowing with emotion. The gift exchange continued, each opened package bringing more smiles and hugs. There were new dolls, storybooks, games, and clothes, but the sparkle in Esme's eyes was not for the value of the presents, but for the sheer joy of being there, safe and loved. "Daddy," she said as she hugged a new stuffed animal, "do you know what the best present is?" Marshall smiled, already knowing the answer. "What, my love?" "Being here with you." Esme organized her presents into meticulous piles, occasionally stopping to hug her father or show something that made her particularly happy. Can we put this puzzle together now, Daddy? Please, please. Marshall looked at his daughter, her face aglow with the pure joy of the moment, and felt his own heart might burst with happiness. All the suffering of the past few months seemed like a distant nightmare compared to this reality. His princess back, smiling, playing, simply being a happy child. "What is it, Daddy?" Esme asked, noticing his teary eyes. Marshall smiled, pulling her into another hug. "Nothing, my love, I'm just very, very happy." The night wore on, but no one in the mansion felt sleepy. Esme was curled up in a new blanket by the fireplace, admiring the snow that kept falling outside. Marshall brought 2 steaming mugs of hot chocolate, sitting down beside her on the plush carpet. "Daddy," she began, her voice soft and dreamy, "can we do this every Christmas?" He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair. "Every Christmas? Every day. Every hour you want, my princess." Between sips of hot chocolate and bites of cookies, Esme began to share her plans for the future. She wanted to go back to school, take ballet again, have piano lessons like before. But now there was something different in her dreams, a desire to also help other children who, like her, had gone through difficult times. "You know, Daddy, when I was on the street, many kids were nice to me. I want to do something for them." Marshall felt his chest swell with pride to see how his daughter had turned her pain into compassion. The fireplace crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Esme picked up one of the new books she had received and snuggled into her father's lap like she used to when she was smaller. "Read to me," she asked, her eyes already heavy with sleep, but bravely resisting to savor every moment. Marshall opened the book, his deep, gentle voice filling the room with stories of warrior princesses and happy endings, stories that now held a much deeper meaning for both of them. Between stories, they talked about little things, made plans, dreamed together. Esme wanted a puppy. "To keep me company when you're working, Daddy." Marshall was already picturing which shelter they would visit after Christmas. She also wanted to redecorate her room, but made sure to keep some things exactly as they were. "Mom's picture stays where it is," she declared firmly, "because she's been protecting us all this time." Esme fought against sleep, her eyes closing and opening as she tried to tell one more story. Make one more plan, savor one more moment. Marshall watched her with infinite love, etching every expression, every gesture, every word into his heart. "You don't have to fight sleep, princess. Tomorrow we'll have the whole day together. And then another one and another. Finally, sleep won the battle." Esme fell asleep on her father's lap, still holding one of her new presents. Marshall picked her up gently, marveled at how small and precious she seemed. Climbing the stairs carefully so as not to wake her, he thought about how life could change so completely, from the deepest darkness to the brightest light. In her room, as he laid her in her bed and tucked her in lovingly, Marshall noticed that she was smiling in her sleep. It was no longer the restless and frightened sleep of recent times, but a peaceful sleep of someone who feels completely safe and loved. He arranged her stuffed animals around her as she liked, and stood there for a moment just watching her gentle breathing. The photo of Esme's mother on the bedside table seemed to smile at the scene. Marshall touched the frame softly, whispering a silent thank you to his late wife for having protected their little princess throughout her ordeal. The room was lit only by the star-shaped lampshade, a new present tonight, creating a magical and cozy atmosphere. Before leaving, Marshall stopped at the bedroom door, his heart overflowing with love and gratitude. Esme stirred slightly in her sleep, hugging one of her new teddy bears. "Merry Christmas, my princess," he whispered. "May this be just the first of many, many happy Christmases we'll have together." And as he gently closed the door, he could swear he saw an even bigger smile on his daughter's sleeping face, as if even in her dreams she knew that finally, truly, she was home. In another reality, totally different from the one Marshall and Esme shared, Christmas night at the women's penitentiary was far from the lavish parties Delilah used to attend. Her faded orange uniform replaced her designer dresses, and her hands, once perfectly manicured, were rough and red from scrubbing floors. She and Agnes had been assigned to the kitchen that night, preparing the feast for the other inmates. "Faster with those dishes, princess," one of the guards yelled, making Delilah flinch. How life had changed. Agnes was in no better situation. The woman, who once lived in a mansion, now spent her days cleaning the prison's bathrooms and corridors. Her face, always made up before, showed deep lines of fatigue and bitterness. "This is all your fault," she whispered to Delilah as they chopped vegetables. "Your stupid plan landed us here." Delilah didn't even respond. These arguments were constant between them since their arrest 6 months ago. The prison kitchen was hot and stuffy, filled with steam and mixed smells. Delilah stirred a massive pot of soup, her back aching from the effort. An inmate walked past her, purposefully bumping into her. "Watch it with that soup, madame. Don't want it turning out like that slop you served last week." The other inmates laughed, and Delilah bit her lip to keep from crying. Her reputation as the evil rich lady preceded her. Everyone there knew of her crime against a child. Agnes tried to maintain some dignity as she carried stacks of trays, but it was a losing battle. Her grey hair was tied in a net, and beads of sweat trickled down her face. One of the older inmates stopped her in the hallway. "Hey, evil granny, don't forget to clean the bathrooms properly after the feast. Last time there was still dirt left." Agnes clenched her fists, but didn't dare respond. She had learned the hard way that reacting only made her situation worse. The hours dragged as they prepared the prison's Christmas feast. It was a simple meal: soup, bread, some chicken and rice. Nothing compared to the lavish banquets they used to serve at their parties. Delilah watched the other inmates receiving visitors in the yard through the small kitchen window. No one came to visit them. Marshall had made sure they were completely isolated, using his influence to transfer them to a prison far from anyone they knew. "Where's that spoiled brat?" the kitchen chief yelled, looking for Delilah. "The dishes need washing." Delilah dropped the pot she was holding and ran to the sink, her hands trembling. She still wasn't used to being called that. Spoiled brat, princess, madame, all sneering nicknames used by the other inmates. As she scrubbed greasy pans, she thought of her former maids, how she used to treat them with arrogance. Agnes had just finished mopping the floor when an inmate walked past, dragging muddy boots. "Oops, sorry about that, scammer lady." The trail of dirty footprints made Agnes close her eyes, counting to 10. She'd have to clean it all over again. Delilah watched the scene, remembering how her mother used to humiliate Esme, forcing her to mop the floor repeatedly. Now karma had come around. The smell of food wafted through the prison, but it wasn't the appetizing aroma of a traditional Christmas feast. Delilah tried to improve the taste of the soup with the scant ingredients available, but it was an impossible task. "If I were you, I'd make that food better," an inmate threatened as she walked past. Last time the dinner was bad, the cook ended up with a black eye. Delilah swallowed hard, stirring the soup with more vigor. The prison cafeteria was packed when Delilah and Agnes started serving the Christmas feast. The two, wearing stained aprons over their faded uniforms, positioned themselves behind the food troughs. A line of irritated inmates formed, each one glaring disdainfully at the duo. "Well, well, look who's serving us today," a tall inmate sneered. "The scammer madames. So is the food up to your usual standards?" Agnes tried to keep her hands steady as she served the soup, but an inmate purposefully knocked the ladle, splashing the hot liquid onto her uniform. "Oops, sorry, Granny." The woman laughed as others applauded the joke. Agnes wiped her stained uniform with trembling hands, bitterly remembering how she used to humiliate Esme in her own kitchen. "Keep serving," the guard ordered, unconcerned by the incident. Delilah sweated as she served the rice and chicken. An especially intimidating inmate stopped in front of her, holding out her tray. "What is this puny portion? You think you're at your mansion, serving those tiny rich people plates?" Before Delilah could respond, the woman grabbed the scoop and served herself a massive portion, spilling food everywhere. "Clean that up, princess, and do a good job, 'cause you'll be cleaning a lot of floors around here." The trays kept coming, and so did the taunts. "Hey, scammer," an inmate in line yelled. "Is it true you tortured a little kid? We don't take too kindly to people messing with children around here." Other inmates started yelling too, some banging their trays on the tables. Delilah tried to make herself small, but there was no escaping the accusing stares and cruel comments. The situation worsened when an inmate tasted the soup and spat it back onto the tray. "What is this crap? Not even on Christmas is this food worth it." She pushed the tray hard, spilling all the contents over the counter where Delilah was serving. "Clean this up, you useless thing, and next time remember you're not in your palace anymore." Delilah grabbed a dirty rag and began cleaning, swallowing her humiliation. Agnes tried to defend her daughter when a particularly aggressive inmate began shouting about the quality of the food, but it only made the situation worse. "Look, the wicked mother-in-law still has strength to fight," the woman mocked, throwing her hard bread in Agnes's face. "Maybe then you'll learn that you're nobody here, nobody." Other inmates began throwing pieces of bread too, turning the two of them into targets of their cruel amusement. The guard finally intervened, but not to help them. "Enough of this mess. Whitmore, Marlowe, you two are going to clean this entire cafeteria after, and no complaining, or it's solitary." Delilah and Agnes exchanged defeated looks. Their nights always ended like this, cleaning up the mess the others made on purpose, knowing that the next day it would start all over again. An older inmate approached the counter, her hard eyes fixed on Delilah. "You know what's worse than spending Christmas in jail, Princess? It's spending it knowing you deserve to be here, making a little child go hungry, making her work like a slave. Now you're tasting the same poison." The words struck Delilah like stabs, because they were true. Every humiliation she suffered was a reflection of what she had done to Esme. The cafeteria was chaos after the last inmate was served. Food thrown everywhere, trays overturned, scraps scattered across the floor. An intentional mess that Delilah and Agnes would have to clean up. While the other inmates returned to their cells to enjoy what was left of Christmas night, the two former socialites grabbed buckets and brooms, beginning their long task. 15 years, Agnes murmured, mopping the dirty floor. 15 years in this hell. Delilah, kneeling and scrubbing a particularly stubborn stain on the floor, thought about how her life had changed. There were no more elegant parties, designer clothes, expensive jewelry. Her days were now filled with hard labor and constant humiliation. The judge had been especially harsh in her sentence, influenced by the expensive lawyers Marshall had hired. Mandatory community service, he had ruled, cleaning and kitchen duty. Let them serve others as they forced that child to serve. The cafeteria lights began to flicker, a sign that they would soon be turned off. Agnes and Delilah hurried their pace, knowing they would be punished if they didn't finish the cleaning in time. From somewhere in the prison, they could hear Christmas carols playing, a cruel reminder of the life they had lost. "Stop daydreaming and scrub properly," a guard scolded, kicking Delilah's bucket and spilling dirty water onto the newly cleaned floor. "Well, I guess you'll have to start all over again." The dark corridors of the prison echoed with the sounds of the night, distant crying, muffled conversations, the occasional scream of a nightmare. Agnes finished cleaning the bathrooms, her back aching from the effort. An old photo had fallen from her pocket, her in her mansion, rich and elegant. The guard snatched the photo and tore it to pieces. "That life is over, Grandma. Better get used to reality." The pieces of the photo mingled with the dirty water on the floor. Delilah was putting away the cleaning supplies when she heard some inmates passing by. "Hey, look at the lady. Enjoying the maid life?" Laughter echoed down the hallway. "There's more work waiting for you tomorrow, Princess. A lot more." Delilah shrank against the wall, waiting for them to pass. Her once delicate hands were now calloused and cracked from the chemicals. This was her fate now. 15 years of forced labor and humiliation. Agnes found her daughter in the corridor leading to the cells. "They're not letting us stay in the same cell tonight either," she said, her voice tired. It was another form of punishment. Mother and daughter, who had planned everything together, could barely see each other now. The guards made sure to separate them, knowing it made the sentence even harder. "Merry Christmas, Mum," Delilah muttered bitterly before being pushed into her cell. The night in prison was cold, colder than usual on this Christmas. Delilah huddled under the thin blanket of her bed, listening to the nighttime sounds of the prison. Somewhere an inmate was singing a Christmas song, her sad voice echoing through the hallways. Delilah closed her eyes, but the images of her former life brought no more comfort. They only reminded her of everything she had lost because of her greed. Agnes, in her own cell at the other end of the prison, stared at the dirty walls. A constant drip marked the time, like a reminder that every second there was part of her punishment. "Even the rats live better than us here," she thought, watching a rodent scurry quickly down the corridor. It was a bitter irony. She who had so despised poor people, now living in even worse conditions. The last round of the night passed by their cells. "Sleeping well, princesses?" a guard taunted, banging her baton against the bars. The day starts early tomorrow. Lots of floors to mop, lots of toilets to clean. Delilah and Agnes in their separate cells, curled up on their hard beds. This was their new reality. Endless days of hard labor, nights of loneliness and regret. In their uncomfortable beds, mother and daughter were thinking the same thing. How their plans for wealth and luxury had turned into this endless nightmare. Outside, life went on. Marshall and Esme celebrated a happy Christmas at their mansion, while they had only the certainty that each day would be the same as the one before, full of hard work, humiliations, and the harsh truth that this was only the beginning of their long punishment. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to continue bringing exciting stories almost every day. Don't miss the next surprising narrative that is about to appear on your screen. We are immensely grateful to have you here with us. Now, you can click on the links that are appearing on the screen right now. We have a special selection just for you, full of valuable stories and guaranteed entertainment. See you there.